how to write an executive summary that wins more business. Let's look at how to do that, and let's look at the kind of mistakes to avoid when writing executive summary. Because I think for a lot of people getting started, it's hard to tell the difference between the executive summary and the introduction. You know, where did it match, where did it overlap, how to format things differently, what approaches to take. So we're going to cover all of that in this tutorial. Okay, just three kind of goals you have in the executive summary itself. The first is to structure it in a logical manner. What we mean here is that the flow of the executive summary, let's say it's a one-pager, that it moves in a kind of coherent, logical way from the start to the end. However, at the same time, you need to make sure that at the very end of the summary, that it bridges into the introduction in a logical way, and we'll discuss how to do that soon. The next thing is to be interesting, and of course to build trust and credibility. By interesting, what we mean is that, you know, if you think of your executive summary as kind of like a pre-sales document for your business plan or for your report or for your proposal, it needs to get the reader kind of, you know, enthusiastic about what you're talking about. I do a lot of work with proposal development, and I often evaluating proposals, by the way, for the government, and I often find that a lot of the executive summaries are kind of almost boilerplate, very generic, very flat. They don't reflect any kind of enthusiasm for the writer, and you know, if you don't put the enthusiasm into creating the document, then me as the evaluator is unlikely to feel much interest in it. The other thing too is to build trust and credibility, and what we mean here is that this is your chance to highlight to the person reading it that you have, say, a track record in something, or you've some unique or different angle that makes what's coming next in the main document worth their while to read. So think of it as a kind of a pre-sales document, a one-pager, and you begin to get closer there. Now, one way of looking at the difference between the executive summary and the introduction is that the executive summary starts big at the large kind of parts of your document and works down to smaller aspects of the document, whereas the introduction starts small, and then for the rest of the document it works out from there. So they're both coming in different ways, and you know, in different tutorials on the site we'll give you kind of different tactics, different ways to help you to write both of those. So you're starting with the executive from the bigger picture and working your way down, and the introduction starts with the smaller things and then works its way out. Okay, the executive summary sells the main document, and again what that means is that if you think about it, if you ripped out the executive summary and just put it on the table and saw it as a kind of a standalone sales document, that's really its purpose. It's kind of to say to the person reading it, hey, read this. If it's sufficiently interesting, then go ahead and read my proposal, my grant application, my studies. This is my pre-sales document, so to speak. Okay, and who needs it? When do I need to write it? It covers a broad spectrum, and for the most part, we're going to talk about business development, business planning, proposal development, technology, but it also applies to academic studies, to environmental studies. But essentially for what we're talking about, it's business planning, how you frame the concept in your business plan, and for grant applications and proposals where you want to justify the investment you're looking for. So that's where we're kind of coming from here. Then as regards to reader, I mean, the term executive summary implies it's executives, but it's not really. It's anybody in a decision-making role. And that's really the way to think about it. When you're writing a document, or sorry, the summary, think about how is this going to help the reader make a decision? And sometimes that decision is simply to push it further up the chain and kind of say to their superior, hey, I've read this application or this, you know, proposal. I suggest we should discuss it with this guy. We should talk to him, bring him in, whatever it might be. But again, the key thing is that it's someone in a decision-making role. I put in the term experts here, and experts covers a broad spectrum. And why I've said not technical, what I mean here is that this isn't the place to get into the nitty-gritty of the technology. You don't want to try to show off very, very technical terms that will possibly exclude people. It's okay to refer to them or to highlight something, but be sensitive to the fact that in general, the people reading it are probably more the people who are in control of the purse strings rather than making the decision, say, to buy something which comes next. And the third point then is journalists. They might be, say, interested in your say your business plan, or if you have an annual report, something like that. So you need to structure it so that they're also stimulated and interested to read the rest of your document. Okay. Write the executive summary after the main document. What we mean here is that it's premature to write it at the start. Now, I know it does come at the start of the document, but really if you think about it, it's only when you've written your whole proposal or you've written the grant application and you understood it, you understand it in depth, then you have the kind of you have the ammunition, so to speak, to go ahead then and to shape your executive summary. It's almost impossible to do it the other way around. You can, but I think you're going to find you've created a strange beast and you'll probably end up revising it many times. So wait till you've the whole document written, let aside, let it sit, and then start writing your executive summary. Okay, a few different tips. Now, as it suggests, you're going to summarize the key points here. And what we mean is that if you think of your grant application or business plan having, say, five main sections in it, you try to mirror that structure so that the person reading the executive can kind of go, oh, the second paragraph is talking about the proposed solution or the methods they've used, and they can find that easily in the main document. So don't be too smart. Don't try to, create any. There's an accepted format for executive summaries, and if you follow that, you put the reader at will feel relaxed. They'll be able to map what's in the summary to what's in the main document. The next thing is don't copy the introduction, and that really goes back to a lot of the proposal development work that I see where people are literally copying and pasting out of the introduction into the executive summary just to fill up the page. And it smacks of laziness. It also demonstrates that you don't have the skills or the wherewithal to position your overall product, your idea, your concept in a way that's interesting for the readers. And the third point is to, it isn't a place to make direct sales pitches. However, if you structure it in a certain way, you stimulate the interest of the person to read the document, so indirectly it becomes a mechanism for creating sales. Okay, and as regards mirroring the main document, again, what I was saying is that, especially for proposal development, proposals often have a very fixed format about the way it should be structured and laid out. And if you're applying to government documents, it's best to mirror that in the executive summary. You don't need to say chapter 1, 2, and 3 and so forth, but use the same formats, the same headings, so that there's a commonality between both of them. Okay, and as always, generate enthusiasm. If you're not interested in what you're writing, the person reading won't feel the same thing. Okay. Establish authority. That's the other thing. I mean, when you're writing it, you're trying to say, look, we are the people who can build this product, or we are the people who believe we've found a way to resolve this issue. And if you have people on board who are kind of experts in certain areas or who have experience in certain areas, this is your chance to highlight that. You don't need to give their CV information, so on and so forth, but you do want to kind of highlight the things that you've done, so that in other words, you don't want to say that you have 3 people with PhDs on your team halfway through the document. The person will never find it. So if you have those on your team and you're lucky enough to do that, mention it in the executive summary in a certain way, weave it into the narrative. So look for ways to establish your authority, look for ways to demonstrate you're worth talking to. Okay, a few writing tips. When we say avoid emotional language, we mean, what we're saying is avoid something overly salesy, avoid kind of the typical cliches you find in a lot of sales documents, the kind of the waffle that kind of creates all this kind of pollution basically in content. The same with jargon and cliches. You're trying to distill this down to one page. You should really, really, really make it very lean, very simple, short sentences, direct to the point, things like jargon, cliches, all that stuff. It all, if those are left in the executive summary, it just shows to the reader that you haven't made the effort to consider their, what they're looking for, and you haven't looked for ways to excite them, basically. As regards standing over everything, if you make a claim in the executive summary, whatever that may be, like for example, you said that research studies have found something, you need to quote it. You need to show where the source for those research findings are. You can't make wild claims that you can't substantiate. So you can, by the way, but if you're challenged on them, you're in trouble. And keep one idea per paragraph. That's a really good way of structuring the summary. So if you have 5 paragraphs in it, one idea per paragraph, and that gives you a nice, simple way for the reader to scan through it and to identify the key points and move kind of down the page. So one idea per paragraph, don't mix things up. Subheadings are a nice way to break up the flow of the document. You don't want to have one large block of text where the reader, where it's a real struggle to try and pull out what they're talking about. Use subheadings to break up the presentation of the document, or sorry, the summary. As regards where does it go? It goes after the table of contents, not before it. And the idea is that it leads into the introduction. So it's a 1 or a 2 pager, and the idea is that you warm up the reader, you generate interest, you begin to kind of, highlight 2 or 3 points that you think makes it worth their while to read it. But then you have to find a way at the end of the summary to link it or to bridge it into the introduction. So there's a nice kind of connection from one section to the other, and it flows naturally. Again, the point is that it's for decision makers. Don't think of it exclusively in terms of people who are executives. It's anybody who's going to be making a decision related to your document. Okay, how to structure it. Let's try to provide some context. And in other words, what we mean by this is that if you're writing, say, for a grant application, you can talk about why you're interested in this area or why you think now is the time to invest in this. And that helps orient the reader where they kind of go, oh, now I get it. The reason they're applying for this, or the reason why they want investment for this, is because of this situation or this current kind of dilemma. So orientating the reader gives them a kind of a center of gravity, and they know from here on, now we're going to go down this road here. As regards defining the scope, what's in and what's out, what I mean is that if you're doing something of a scientific or technical nature, you may want to state up front that what you're writing about in your report, for example, excludes certain areas, like they're not within the parameters of your document. Explain the approach, which means that if you're doing, say, research, or if you're doing some kind of like a marketing plan, and you've done different ways to investigate, say, a potential market, explain how you got there. Explain the methodology, explain the tools, the system, the audience, and so on. And then try to distill it into like a very simple 1 or 2 sentences that the reader can get straight away. And really the acid test of your executive summary is that the reader should be able to explain to someone else in 1 sentence what you're writing about. That's really what it comes down to. The other thing then is like, what are you recommending? So if you're writing executive summary, say in response to an RFP, you have to say that you're recommending, say, this type of, for example, this content management solution, and the reason you're doing it, the justification is that based on these findings you found, these cost savings, your experience. So you have to stand over what you're recommending. The final point is that it stands alone, and what I mean is that your executive summary isn't part of the main document. It isn't part of the report. It's kind of, it comes before it in the sense that it's prepended to the actual document itself. And if you think of it in those terms, you can't go wrong. This is a standalone document, 1 or 2 pages. It's the sales document for the main one. And write it in those terms. Okay. Like we said earlier on, it goes from the bigger picture down to the smaller points, whereas the introduction then works the other way around. Exactly. Write it independently of the main document. And, you know, I think that really helps you then later on when you're trying to separate in your mind what should go into the executive summary. Like if you imagine the main document wasn't written, fine. Now, how could I distill it into one page? 1 or 2 pages is fine. The main thing is that after the person has read it, can they make a decision? That's really what it comes down to. So if you need 2 pages to try to influence them, to try to persuade them to read the document, fine, you need 2 pages. And in some cases, like I've seen documents that are say 300 or 400 pages, like very, very large, say United Nations reports, and they often go to 4 or 5 pages because it has to. You can't capture everything in one page. So just use common sense, really. Let's get into some writing tactics now. As regards to the document itself, use short sentences. Try to connect the ideas together so there's just a natural flow from one idea to the next, and you're trying to generate interest with each one. So don't repeat things. Be very, very careful if you're writing it in different drafts, that you don't end up using the same phrases, say in the first paragraph or the fourth or the third. It's easy to do that when you're stopping and starting. So be careful that way. Be inclusive means that if you use very specific terminology, if you use very industry jargon that would be kind of that certain technical people would know, by doing so you're excluding others. Yes, so try to include people in the conversation, in the dialogue, and the simplest way to do that is use simple, everyday, ordinary English. Don't try to be smart, short words, and let it flow. And as regards, watch the tone. In a sense, don't be too buddy-buddy. The people you're talking to, they do have the authority to give you the yay or nay for what you're looking for. So just be sensitive to that as well. Okay, as regards the structure of the paragraphs, use short paragraphs. 2 or 3 lines is fine. One idea per paragraph, and make it scannable. And what I mean by this is that, the person reading it is probably in a hurry. They're not going to read it with the same intensity that you've written it. So write it so that they can pull out and kind of identify very, very quickly at a glance what you're talking about. And if you write it in the correct way, you generate the enthusiasm, then yes, they'll go to the main document and begin to read it. Again, don't be clever. Use the same fonts, font families as the main report. I'd recommend you use size 12 because the last thing you want is people having to strain to read the executive summary. So you can possibly use even a larger font in the main document. And the advantage of double spacing is that it increases the readability. It makes it easier for the person to read it. And if you feel that possibly the person reading it, say, are, of a certain age profile, you might want to be more forgiving, larger font, easy to read, and it all helps you, of course, As regards to the reviewing, if you think about it, if you get the executive summary wrong, everything else you've written doesn't get a chance. So you really, really want to put, much more time into writing it than the 1 or 2 pages would seem to, you would think it requires. And one way I go about, making sure that it reads well is that I print it out, I read it aloud, and try and pick up where it jars, where it doesn't sound authentic, where I feel that something isn't quite convincing, or where I find I have to read it 2 or 3 times to get it. And it's only by reading it aloud that actually that comes true. And again, try to reduce the word count. Keep cutting it back all the time, but don't cut it back so that it's so tight that it becomes almost like an abstract. You're just trying to cut out the waffle. You're trying to avoid repeating yourself, and you're trying to remove things that that they already know. As you said earlier on, no one's going to read your business plan if the executive summary isn't, inspiring, if it doesn't encourage you to generate interest. So you really have to work a lot on getting it right. From another angle, it's a bit like the headline to a blog post or an article. It really has to kind of capture the reader's interest. And if you make the effort to do it right, then you lead them into your main document. How to test that it works. The way I do it is I try to print it out, give it to someone who has nothing to do with the project. Give it to some, and by the way, don't give it to a friend, because a friend will say it's great. They're just kind of going to keep you on side. Try and find someone who's not included in the project. Ask them if possible to read it aloud, if they'll meet you halfway. And then kind of say to them, well, do you get it? Would you buy it? Does it sound interesting? And if they say yes, it's fine. Then ask them, can they explain it in one sentence? What is it you're talking about? What's the one thing that comes through? And if they can't, you got a problem. The other thing about the executive summary is that expect to write it at least 3 or 4 times. Write it once, leave it alone, come back again, write it again, and keep coming at it in waves and waves. And each time you do, you distill it down, and it keeps improving. So don't expect to do it right the first time. Give yourself at least 2 or 3 different goes to get it right. Several drafts. Look for ways to make it interesting, but not too salesy. Making connections means you're trying to connect with the person reading it. So you're trying to find something that, triggers things emotionally. Then it's going to go, oh, that sounds interesting. I could, I must look into that. And one way you can do that is that you can back it up with facts, statistics, things that demonstrate that you've really looked into this area here, that you really are very knowledgeable, and that there's just something in their document something in the document that if they don't read it, then possibly they're missing out on something. So all those little ways of kind of teasing them to read the main document you need to think about. And revise in waves. Don't expect to write it once and then to revise and get it over with. Expect to do several revisions, but it's worth the effort, because if you get it right, then the person will read your business plan. They will read your proposal or your grant application, and keep pushing towards the finishing line. So that's pretty much it. If that was of interest to you, there's other videos on the website along the same area, and we have a newsletter on the website. It's all good stuff. Tweet, like, or subscribe. It's all appreciated. That's it. Best of luck, okay? Bye-bye.